Each letter is a story. It's a memory in time, captured through a story in the person's words.
It's amazing how there was this camaraderie at the post office, wasn't it?
It felt like Postman Pat, actually, just driving around in a van, around the farms,
It's too good of a building to just be forgotten about.
It powered the final leg of the Industrial Revolution, served the nation through 2 world wars, and was a lifeline for those with loved ones on the other side of the world. Though it served the community for close to a century, Dewsbury Central Post Office on Wakefield Old Road now sits empty with an uncertain future. The legacy and memories of this historic building, however, can never be forgotten. My name's Ruby Jones, and you're listening to Post, Present and Future Destination Dewsbury. This 5-part podcast series is part of the Post Office Cultures Project and is dedicated to exploring the history of the beating heart of a historic West Yorkshire town, told through the voices of those who call it home one letter at a time. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Post, Present and Future Destination Dewsbury with me, Ruby Jones. I first became involved in the Post Office Cultures Project in June 2025 and quickly became fixated on the story of a building I'd walked past hundreds of times and never given a second thought. Designed by architect Walter Pott, Dewsbury Central Post Office was first opened to the public in 1908. With its distinctive Edwardian Baroque-style architecture and prime location opposite Dewsbury Town Hall, the building was a hive of activity until it sadly closed in 1997. I was curious to learn more about this enigmatic building and its forgotten history, so decided to start at the very beginning. I wanted to get a sense of what Dewsbury was like as a town at the turn of the 20th century. This led me to sitting down with a local expert for a conversation that connected all things from Charlie Chaplin and Blackpool Rock to my beloved hometown.
Well, my name's Simon Reid. I'm a videographer and a local historian, and I was born in Dewsbury in 1977.
Where did your interest in Dewsbury's history begin?
Well, actually, it started at quite a young age. I remember being in town with my mum, and we're walking around, and she pointed out to me where one of the train stations were, and she said, "Oh, that used to be a train station." As a young person, I looked at it and I thought, how could that possibly be a train station? And it's a strange thing that just stuck in my mind ever since, obviously to this very day. But as I got a bit older, I started to get interested in local history a bit more. Then my next step was to buy some photographs off eBay, historical photographs of Dewsbury. So we took those home and started to look through those photographs. And then I realised as we were looking at these photographs and remembering what buildings were in certain places and how things have changed, it brought back memories from years ago, things that come from right from the back of my mind. A bit like when you listen to an old song and it takes you to a certain place in time. It did that exact thing. So I had a bit of a brainwave. I thought, it'd be great to go out on location with a stills camera and photograph these same photographs in current day. And then I could put a presentation together and then other people could have the same experience. But then that's just snowballed and snowballed. I've done a documentary, I've done a lot of local history videos, and I'm currently working on a documentary at the moment as well, also to do with local history. So it's become a massive part of my life.
Have you got a favourite Dewsbury fact?
So Dewsbury is where we invented lettered rock. Now a lot of people think, lettered rock, Blackpool. No, we did it in Dewsbury, in a building that were right next door almost to the Tudor cinema. I believe it was called Slades and Bullock. The actual text on the first piece of rock was War Emma. Now that relates to a song from back at that time. The person that invented it, I believe that was their favourite song. And Emma is actually, you think, Emma, it must have been a lover of his. Emma's an actual horse, which is sounds really strange. So he took that to Blackpool, put it on sale there, and it took off, and the rest is history.
One of the focuses of this podcast is Dewsbury's former post office, which opened in 1908. Can you paint a picture of the town, say at the turn of the century in the late 1800s and early 1900s?
Well, around that time, it's easy to think back and look back at history books and think that things were completely different. In actual fact, a lot of the people's lives that were around at that time and lived in those days is very similar to today. We shared a lot of similar shops. There's a lot of similar buildings and the things we did in the spare time. That's still the same today. Like for instance, around 1900 in the marketplace, they had the new arcade open, which was, I believe, at $18.99, which were a massive thing for Dewsbury back then. It were a big thing. People would have been very proud of that. And in there, you had things like Ivor Byrne's shoe shop. Now, people today still remember and would probably have shopped in Ivor Byrne's shoe shop, which it should be something for the history books, which is actually classed as current day as well as historic as well. So we share a lot. So that were a big thing for Dewsbury at that time. Also as well, I think about 1903, the first electric tram went from Dewsbury Marketplace up to the Combs at Thornhill, which again back then would have been something very exciting for the town. And not so long before that, there was the town hall that opened only a few years before, which was obviously a magnificent building, which is still enjoyed today as well. And also Cronus Park was opened for the public to visit, also a few years prior to that date as well. So a lot of great things were happening in Dewsbury around that time.
And how important was Dewsbury as a town around this time?
It was a really important place, and a very successful place. Obviously, right in the heart of the heavy woolen district. So you had like Shoddy and Mungo, and there were a lot of wool mills about. One name that people would be very familiar with, and some people still remember today, would be Mark Oldroyd. Now, he was a Dewsbury lad, and in his early 20s, he started to open wool mills in the town. One which still exists today, not as a wool mill, it's actually apartments, and that's Spinkwell Mills, which still exists today. And he would later become an MP, and also was knighted as well, so became Sir Mark Oldroyd. And like I say, one of his buildings still stands in the town today.
One of the things that's fascinated me about the town around this time is the Empire Theatre. For example, I've got a poster upstairs from the early 1910s, and it was a production of Sherlock Holmes, starring one young Charles Chaplin as Dr. Watson.
It's absolutely incredible, to think that Charles Chaplin, also known as Charlie Chaplin, would be walking, on the same pavements that we do, on the same roads in Dewsbury as Charlie Chaplin. It's unbelievable.
And I suppose that gives you a sense as to how important and vibrant the town was around this time. At just one town over in Batley, we of course had Batley Variety Club hosting loads of big names.
I mean, Batley Variety Club, all the biggest stars, or certainly most of the biggest stars, came to Batley, all the big names. And it sounds a bit like, the story of Batley Variety Club sounds a bit like a fairy tale. But yeah, absolutely, it's incredibly true. And again, the building's still there for us to enjoy today, just not as a club.
Wasn't there quite a few cinemas in the town centre as well at this time?
As there was quite a few. Now, if you read a lot of history books, they'll say, there were 5 or 6 theatre/cinemas in the town. There's actually more. There's one that gets missed off quite a lot. Well, it started out as a permanent circus in the town, and it were on what's now known as Whitehall Way, just at the end of the current market. People might see that there's like an area where there might be a couple of benches, but it's like a big open space. That's where the circus was. It later became the Hippodrome, a music hall, and then they redeveloped that building and it opened as the Whitehall Cinema. Now, most history books don't talk about that because it closed, off the top of my head, in the 1920s, but it is remembered in the street name Whitehall Way. So there was that one, there was the Rex Picture House, Playhouse, Tudor Cinema, which was the Theatre Royal. I've mentioned the Playhouse. There was also the Pioneer Pictures as well. Some people might remember the Asoldo, which started out as a picture house and closed in 1993. People in the era that we're talking about would remember that because that opened in 1913 and closed in 1993. And obviously then you've got the Empire Palace Theatre as well, which was stunning.
Could you walk us through a day in the life of the town centre around this time?
Well, if you had to go back in time to Dewsbury Town Centre, so whilst there were some buildings that are still there today, the sounds and probably the smells would be completely different. People's fashions would be different. People generally would be in you'd see people either in boiler suits because they're working at mills. People generally had a very smart appearance with a suit, waistcoat and tie, a flat cap. There'd be horse and carts as well, so that's obviously noisy on cobbled streets and very busy. Very busy with workers, very busy with shoppers, because obviously back then we didn't really have shopping centres and things like that, so if people wanted something, they went to the local shops to buy it.
And were the people in Dewsbury particularly well off around this time?
I think like today there will have been people with a lot of money, but there are also people at the other end of the spectrum as well that were quite poor. The thing is, I think a lot of people then would have been in work because the amount of mills in Dewsbury was incredible, so there were plenty of jobs, people have worked in the mills, and also as well, connecting those people then to us now, Greenwoods, which you may have heard of, is on Church Street. Now, people living in them days would have got the boiler suits from Greenwoods, and I've spoke to people in Greenwoods, interviewed them people, so they'd get the stock in at the beginning of the week, fill the shelves with boiler suits, and by the end of the week, the shelves would be bare, because of that many mills in Dewsbury. Incredible. And that shop is still there today. It's still Greenwoods. It's not owned by the same family no more, but the name and the business still stands today. And there's also, for people that are visiting Dewsbury, there's a small museum upstairs which is probably one of, or if not the smallest museum in the country, but that's to be done by appointment.
With the post office being just opposite the town hall and just above the Empire Theatre, this must have been an incredibly important building.
That side of town, along with Marketplace, was an incredibly busy part of the town. In fact, part of the edge of Marketplace, where J&B stood, was actually nicknamed the Busy Corner. And if you look back at all photos, you can see exactly why. It was absolutely chocker. So people be all around Marketplace, all the way up to the post office. You had the town hall. So again, most things happened around that area of Dewsbury. But then the Marketplace started to decline. And then in 1904 they opened the new market, which at the time Austin Steel were on that location. So Austin's had to move. They moved across the road to where people might remember the Playhouse Cinema. Obviously the Playhouse Cinema wasn't there at that time, but that's where it went to. And they opened the new covered market in 1904, which then may have pulled some people away from Marketplace. But it was still busy around that area. The good thing about when the arcade was there, it had a double frontage, and it was also a walkthrough. So Marketplace was still popular. You could walk through the arcade, which took you to the new market, so that made that very popular as well. But no, there was still a lot happening around that part of town.
And when did all this start to change or decline? Although perhaps the word decline has too many negative connotations attached to it.
I think there are a few stages to the, decline. Decline seems a bit of a negative word, but it is true. It did start to decline. That's not just Dewsbury. I think that's just the people's shopping habits in general. People wanted a lot of things under one roof. You had the Cooperative Society as well, which was again just at the other side of town, which was a magnificent building. So that took people away from the town centre. Again, that's not necessarily a negative thing, but there's also the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Station, which the booking hall came out in front of the town hall. So that was another thing. When that closed, that took people away from that part of town as well. And then fast forwarding quite a number of years, in the 1980s when they put the ring road in, the area on the Long Causeway, plans were to absolutely flatten all that and replace it with new buildings, including the church. Now, at the last minute, the church was actually saved, which some people say that's a great thing. I personally think it's a great thing that the church was saved, but everything else was flattened. And the plans which I've seen, they would have built a new church there and a multi-storey car park behind, but it were going to have a much more modern feel to it, so I think the ring road affected Dewsbury massively as well. I'm not so sure it was for the best.
What do you think the future holds for Dewsbury Town Centre? And are you optimistic about our town's future?
Well, actually I am. It's easy to look at the negatives in the town, and like a lot of towns, there is some negative things about Dewsbury. But I think over time, obviously the Pioneer House was a compulsory purchase in 2012, and that were renovated. I think it cost something like, off the top of my head, don't quote me on this, probably about £12 million. Now for Dewsbury to have investment of that much is absolutely incredible. And not only did it get renovated, which it got done to an amazing standard, I've been inside it as well, it's also been put to great use. It's now the college. So that's fantastic, a massive positive for the town. So the improvement started way back then. And at the moment, obviously, there's the Long Causeway, which is getting regenerated. Now, as an historian, I get a bit emotional about change, and I don't like to see change. That's just my opinion, but I'm quite excited about what's happening on the Long Causeway. But the big thing for me at the moment is the arcade that I spoke about earlier in Marketplace. The arcade group have done an amazing job at getting the funds together and doing what they're doing to make it reality. And they managed to get the funds, and it's getting renovated at the moment. The date for that opening has been put back, but anybody that's done any renovating, whether it be a car, a chest of drawers, until you start renovating, you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. Things will crop up, delays are going to be made, it may cost more money. But I've been inside, they're doing an absolute amazing job. And not only that, when it opens, they're going to be making sure that it's got the right mix of shops. There's no point opening a new lovely shopping arcade and having 10 of the same shop that you've already got in town. It won't bring people to the town. It's going to be a visually stunning arcade, as it was originally, a lovely collection of shops, and also, in addition to what it had originally, it's also going to have some space for pop-up events like, music venues, things like that, people to do art installations. And I've even spoke about myself opening a pop-up museum for people of Dewsbury. Oh, not just people for Dewsbury, people from far and wide, because I've got quite a lot of collectibles, and I'd be happy to do that, So I'm really, really excited about the opening of the arcade, and I think that could be a massive turning point for the town.
If you were in charge, and let's say money was no object, what would you like to see done with the old post office building?
I'd like it to be open as something more commercial, but whatever they decide to do with it, I think they've got to keep the building and definitely keep the frontage. But I think it's too good of a building to just be forgotten about, and I think because now of the road layout, it does get forgotten about and put on the back burner because it's kind of tucked away now because of the new road layout. But it would be nice to see it open as maybe, I don't know, a venue. I mean, it might be a bit pie in the sky, but a music venue or a space for retail. You know, just something that really makes the most of the stunning architecture.
As we heard from Simon there, around 1908, Dewsbury was an absolute hive of activity, and a town well and truly at the top of its game. This prosperity that the new post office was born into was sadly short-lived. In 1914, peaceful life in this industrial little town was forever changed by the outbreak of World War I. In episode 2 of this series, find out the fascinating role that Dewsbury Central Post Office and its staff played in the war to end all wars. This podcast was produced as part of the Post Office Cultures Project. The interviewee was Simon Reed, with editing and post-production from myself, Ruby Jones. Thanks for listening.